Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Professor Dr. Datta, for inviting me to participate in this panel discussion. Uh, and the topic becomes all the more, I think, relevant and important given the circumstances that we all find ourselves in the world of international higher education. Before I proceed further, am I audible to all?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I am. Okay. So my area of research is predominantly in the area of international higher education and specifically looking at international higher education in institutions which have very few international students on campus. So I've done an extensive piece of research recently looking at how do institutions internationalize when they have restrictions for various reasons of having international students on campus. So part of what I'm going to speak in the next few minutes will draw from that research and try to relate it to the topic that we're talking about. But so let me just reflect a bit on higher education and internationalization before we go on to the topic of online partnerships and global citizenship. So higher education has always had an international dimension, either in the form of a concept of universal knowledge and related research, or in the movement of scholars and students. And evidence of this can be found from way back 6th century BC, the Confucian schools of in China, the Platonic Academy in Athens, the Academy of Gunashipur in Persia, and closer home to the institutions in Nalanda and Takshashila. And Takshashila is known to have offered over 60 subjects, attracting over 10,500 students all over the world. Now, that is in that area. And in the Middle Ages in Europe, you had, during the period of Renaissance, you had a whole range of religious pilgrims. In addition to the religious pilgrims, there were pilgrims or travelers of another kind. And these were primarily consisting of scholars and researchers and professors who were visiting. Their areas of pilgrimage were not temples or monasteries, but more of centers of learning. And I suppose the reasons for this movement of students is not dissimilar to what drives student mobility or current mobility among scholars and researchers today. The desire to broaden one's learning and experience, do research, earn a qualification, and above all, meet and make new friends. In this context, let me just share with you some figures. Globally, it is estimated, this is the OECD 2020 figures, that 5.6 million students are studying outside their home country. Now, that's quite a large number, 5.6 million. But if you put it in the context of the total enrollment in global higher education, this is just over 2.1%. So roughly 2.1% students are globally mobile. In the Indian context, we have 47,000 students inbound, 164 countries, and 590,000 students outbound. These are figures from UNESCO. So we'll just park these figures for a moment. I'll come back to it again in a minute. So it's perhaps useful at this point also to reflect and think about what we understand by internationalization in higher education. And I draw upon the literature, a quote by Dewitt and Hunter, 2015, where they say, and I quote, the intentional process of integrating an international, intercultural, or global dimension into the purpose, functions, and delivery of post-secondary education in order to enhance the quality of education and research for all students and staff, and to make a meaningful contribution to society. So this is a development of an earlier definition by Jane Knight, which is often quoted. Here we're talking about inclusivity, and we are also talking about meaningful contribution to society. So whilst mobility is often seen as a synonym for internationalization, it is important to recognize, as we know from the figures, that just over 2% of the global population enrolled in higher education are mobile. So the question then remains is what happens to the other 98% who are not mobile for a variety of reasons? And this is probably what sits into the context of what we're talking, global education 2015 in terms of global citizenship and online partnership. Now, in this interconnected world that we currently live in, working in a global society entails both social and professional aspects. Uh, it has been mentioned by a number of speakers before me, but the ability to interpret local concerns within a global context and to judge global issues on personal and professional lives are important considerations. And these are to be incorporated into academic programs across higher education. And global citizenship is more aligned with raising awareness of and commitment to global issues such as climate change, poverty, sustainability, global health, and the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which have been alluded to earlier. So, in the context of higher education, how does this translate? So, this is usually identified through the internationalization of the curriculum. And the internationalization of the curriculum is seen as the vehicle of preparing global citizens. So this would imply that institutions are able to help students to gain a sense of how and where they stand in the world and encourage them to work as partners and co-construct programs to develop skills, confidence, and capabilities. So it's about putting the student at the center of what the higher education institution is about, which I think couple of speakers before me have alluded to. Definitely Dr. Nagy, you had mentioned about what the student is going to ask for in terms of on-demand, just-in-time, etc. But also here we are talking about co-constructing knowledge. So international partnerships and collaborations are a way to provide opportunities to that 98% odd of the global student population who are immobile. So the question then remains is that what will partnerships provide and what can we do with partnerships? So again, I'm just going through a few of the areas where we can work with in partnerships. First is program and curriculum internationalization. We can have joint programs, collaborative projects, developing content. It's not just about whose degree you are or whose degree it isn't, but how do you develop content? The fact that we are collaborating in a sense here, we are developing some kind of content if we wish to. If you take this forward, there's content to be developed. Research partnerships are other ways by which institutions can collaborate and partner. Short programs are other bits. Staff exchange. Staff exchange doesn't have to be about physical mobility. Even through virtual exchange, you can have a significant amount of staff exchange, which is again virtual exchanges for staff and students. And last but not the least is what is referred to in the literature as virtual learning or collaborated online international learning, where institutions collaborate, co-create programs, co-create accreditation and deliver. It's not about whose intellectual property rights they are, etc., but this is a joint collaboration. And going back to something alluding to what Dr. Nagy had said, there is an opportunity to provide co-curated programs. So the program that you talked about, which you attended from IBM, is again something which is curated, provided by somebody else. So there are opportunities there to provide those kinds. So that's where the partnerships come in. That's where you can develop the opportunity for that 98% or 98 odd percent students who, for various reasons, are not globally mobile. But there are some important questions. Why do we want this partnership? There has to be some strategic reason. Unless there are similarities or there is reciprocity between the partners, your partnerships are unlikely to give you the results that you're looking for, because both partners, or if it's multiple partners, everybody has to gain from that partnership. Otherwise, there is the thing of, I'm only giving, somebody's only taking, or vice versa. So if those strategic reasons are clear, then one can think about how you're going to partner. Are you going to do a virtual partnership? Are you going to have some online, offline? Are you going to partner for developing content? Are you going to do research partnerships, etc.? Memorandum of understandings are signed between institutions. They're like, if I may use very loosely a term like confetti. They sign and they get stuck in a file and they sit in the international office or wherever it is. And at the appropriate time, those are taken out. Private universities across the world use them for their branding, irrespective of whether that partnership has any meaning to the student or otherwise. But that's a different story altogether. But that's how you then decide how you go. And there are certain questions to ask. we talked about student engagement. What does student engagement mean? Different institutions, different academic systems may, although globally there is a understanding of what a student engagement is, they may interpret it in their own way. Is attending a classroom, going back to a point which Dr. Nagy mentioned about coming into a classroom, does coming into a classroom mean that you're participating? Does coming into a Zoom session or a team session mean that you are participating just because you've come in? So it's more or less like a piece of sponge. You come in, you absorb, but you don't give back anything. So what is engagement is a question which comes in. Then the question comes in, how do you engage your students? So if you are partnering, let's say, a student from, just for an example, I'm saying a South Asian environment or Indian or Bangladesh environment is partnering, the university is partnering with an individual. There might be a challenge in terms of how the students learn in that context, because they expect delivery to be in a particular form, whereas in another environment you might say that, okay, you have to be an independent learner, you've got to come in and do whatever work it is. It might take time for students to ask questions in a broader setting, so the questions are asked after the class is over, not in a class. So there's a cultural issues over there. In the West, professors are more than happy to be called by their first name. In a South Asian context, that's not necessarily the norm. So those are cultural issues, and because you are asked to do that, if you may feel uncomfortable. So those are questions which are to be asked. Then we come to the question of assessment. How do you assess? What is rigor? Is it taking an exam is rigorous, or can you do coursework and assess? And does that meet the thing of test of rigor and quality? And those are some questions you ask. And then comes the question of support. Support is not just if you're doing online or partnerships. Support is not just about technical, but leading on from some of the points I mentioned earlier, the behavioral support as well, because you may be expected to behave in a particular manner, accept information in a particular manner. So that kind of support comes in. And that probably brings into some of the points with John, you had mentioned earlier about, the psychology part of it, the part of learning, and how do people learn, and what are the challenges you might have. So I've just a few more points, and I'll conclude. So what are the challenges we have if you're talking about online partnerships and going forward? The first thing I would bring forward is technology. We assume that everything will work fine. This is perfectly working fine, but even here we had challenges. You may have prepared a slide presentation which you wanted to share. For some people it might have worked, it may not have worked for some other people. Now those are challenges which are on the surface, but beyond that it's about bandwidth, it's about the type of connectivity which is available. If it is at your home, how many people are sharing the same connection device, all those issues are there. Then, which then relates back to access, is that do you have the connectivity, but do you have access to it in terms of devices, in terms of how you work? Also comes the question is, some people might access the material through a mobile device, a phone, and your learning material may not necessarily be designed to be accessed by a phone. So those issues also have to be seen. Then comes the question of equity. So partnerships in terms of, okay, is the learning which is happening with your partner institution, let's say in Asia, who's partnering with an institution in the West? Now, usually when people are talking about partnerships, people are usually talking about, I'm generalizing here, it's usually a north-south, global north collaborating with global south. And there's an assumption the global north has everything to provide to the global south. Let's look at it the reverse way around. An institution from India or Bangladesh or Southeast Asia is collaborating with an institution in the West, whether it's in the UK, US, Ireland, wherever, Europe, and the dominant partner, the provision is coming from the institution in India, right? So the question of equity comes in again, in terms of how equitably it will be distributed, equity amongst learners, etc. And the issue which is discussed, but not necessarily seen as a very critical thing. Often it's only after all the collaborations are happening and classes are begin, people suddenly realize, oh, we didn't consider the time zone. We are in 3 different time zones. So how does it work? Right? So even if you look at the session that we started today, it started at 10, which was for Dr. Nagy, it's in the afternoon. I don't know what time John woke up in the morning, but I didn't definitely log in at 4:30 in the morning. So if you have a class at 10 o'clock and you have 3 different time zones, you've got to consider that. So those are issues which are there. So these are broadly my points. I've gone through very quickly through the points, and I'm happy to discuss some of the points if you have made some, if you have any questions. But I strongly believe that it is through education that we perhaps have the best chance to tame our fears of otherness. You know, the world is filled with this thing of otherness. Oh, I'm this and somebody else is that. It's through education that we can do that, and to be able to create globally inclusive communities. So what we're talking about is, as we go forward from now 2021 to 2050, we need more globally inclusive communities. And that's where higher education plays a major role. I'm not talking about primary and secondary education because that's not the area that I work in, or probably most of our colleagues today here work. But higher education institutions have a pivotal role to play in creating globally inclusive communities. And online partnerships or partnerships as they go forward are a way by which these communities can evolve. We have challenges that are, I mentioned some of the challenges, others may have experienced many more of the challenges the last 18 to 24 months when they have gone primarily online. But there are opportunities, and these opportunities are to be seized, and it gives us the opportunity to actually have more globally inclusive communities. Thank you very much. I'll conclude there.
Thank you, Dr. Gautam. That was a spectacular session of yours. Two main aspects you touched upon, which are the need of the hour. One, internationalization of curriculum, which many have not thought, okay, in the Indian context. And second point is the online partnerships that is emerging. That is, it will take some more time before they become the norm, but that is the only way to go. And I could see a big library behind you, so it's very clear that you're an avid reader, and that makes all the difference.
Well,
when
it's
a
all
reader
there.
speaks,
How much of it comes in is a different thing, but it is there.
Very much. When an avid reader speaks, the world listens. So, as simple as that. And the interesting aspect which you mentioned, 2% of the students are only global. For 98%, if they are to move forward, you touched upon several things, okay, wherein the online partnerships could be helpful. That is a new enlightenment and a new angle which each of the universities, faculty, and institutions can think about in the MTC global context. So one point I would like to mention before I go to the last speaker, that point is there are a large number of speakers from abroad in this forum. Okay. Now the time has come for internationalization and globalization and interdependence. So we cannot just focus on our own faculty. So the faculty has to be multidimensional, multicultural. They have to be global now. So each institution should have a few visiting faculty across. So it is a two-way process. It's a two-way process. So maybe the time has come for each one of us in this forum to take initiative and to invite faculty from other nations. Now online has made it extremely cheap. So no institution will ask you for a budget, okay, or approvals, and all those issues will not be there. So it is comfortable. So let's keep it going now, because the Indian faculty can go and teach in the UK and Ireland, and of course Bangladesh already happening. Similarly, You're always welcome and keep doing it here because MTC Global is a huge forum, it's a huge platform, and we cover almost 70 to 80% of India, and it's time to leverage and share knowledge in this fashion. I think let's start thinking on that now as we go to
Can
the
I
finals. Yeah, yeah.
can I just add a point here? As I mentioned, that you see, my research currently, or the research that I've done, a long, fairly extensive piece of research, is to look at that 2%, that 98%, because this was essentially looking at institutions which have difficulty in getting students, or sending, or communities which have challenges in sending students overseas. And we have that in across India. If you look at, the purpose of a university is to make globally enlightened students. How do you do that if your students are, either for economic reasons or family circumstances or geographical reasons, are unable to move out? So there's a major opportunity here, because the platforms are available, and as you said, of having staff exchange, student exchange, setting up programs where students don't have to physically move, and it can be started off as pilots, and there are a lot of opportunities there.
It's a huge opportunity. Yeah.